Okay, Rabosai, good evening. Hope you're doing well. We are going to move tonight. We have a lot of ground to cover. We're starting at a new parak on the top of Chav Gimel Amud Aleph. We're going to go to the Mishnah toward the bottom of Chav Daled Amud Aleph. A lot of ground to cover. Let's go. Dine Maman is Bishlosha. That's not a Chiddush. Bishlosha what? Rashi over here says, Mashma Zer Borer Lo Bezdin Echad. Shehin Gimel. A whole Bezdin. So, how do we pick? I'm taking you to court or taking me to court. How do we figure out what is going on with our Bezdin? So says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Zeh Borer Lo Echad. I pick Bezdin number 1. Zeh Borer Lo Echad. You pick Bezdin number 2. And then Bishnein Borer in Lohen Od Echad. Then we pick together a third Bezdin. Cryptic, right? Why do we need 9 people? The Gemara is going to ask that. Divrei Reb Meir. Chachamim omrim Shnei Dayanim Borer in Lohen Eid Echad. The 2 Dayanim pick 1 aid. Zeh Posel. I should say Shnei Bali Din over here. No, Shnei Hadayon, yeah. That they pick 1 aid. Zeh Posel Dinos Shel Zeh. One of them picks off that person's dime. Zeh Posel Dinos Shel Zeh. Divrei Reb Meir. Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. I apologize. Third line down. They argue against Mr. Shnei Dayan. Boren Lehen Od Echad. End of the case. The Chachamim say that the 2 Dayanim, they get to pick the third. They get to pick the third Bezdin, which again we'll see soon that it's not Bezdin, but it's Dayanim. Next case, Zeh Posel Dayano Shel Zeh, Zeh Posel Dayano Shel Zeh. Reb Meir, Divrei Reb Meir. Reb Meir says that one person can passel the other person's Dayan. When can I passel your Dayan? Says the Gemara, only bisman shemevi alein rayash and krovim psulim. Only if we have a familial psul. But if you have someone, a dayan, who's a regular kasher, or he's a mumche, he's an expert based on Bezdin's assertions about him, that person's not allowed to be pasaled. Zeh posel edav shel zeh. I get to pasel your edim. Very difficult to understand. Zeh posel edav shel zeh. When is this true? This is true only when I find an inherent psul in your aid. That makes sense. But if we have someone who is a kasher, so then if your aid is considered kasher, you're not allowed to be posel that person. So says the Gemara, I don't understand the first din of the Mishnah. My zeh borer lo echad v'zeh borer lo echad. B'tlasa sagi. 3 people are enough. Why do I need 3 dayanim? 3 batei din, which is 9 people. I only need 3 people. So says the Gemara, you're right. Achi kamar, quarter of the way down. Shezeh borer lo bezin echad. When one person picks one of the batei din, and then as you can see on the side here, if you have it, the language adds in. V'zeh posel dayano shel zeh. So you pick one dayan and I don't like yours. V'zeh bor lo bezdin echad. You picked one bezdin and I don't like yours. Then shnei bor lehen od echad. Then they pick one. So they pick one that they agree to. So I picked the bezdin of the CRC. You picked the bezdin of the Aguda, and I don't like either of them. Together we agree to go to the bezdin of America. Fine. That's what the Mishnah means. So it is talking about batei din, but it's talking about me picking one and you rejecting my bezdin, you picking one and me rejecting your bezdin, and then together we agree that the third bezdin is the one that works. A lova, the borrower, he can say, I'm not allowed to use your bezdin. I don't want to use your bezdin. Our Mishnah seems to say that you're allowed to reject mehecha tesi, that a lova is allowed to do that. The malva is the one who gets to reject. No, you don't have a choice. So says the Gemara. What are we talking about in our Mishnah where we make no distinction between malva and lova, that even a lova can reject? Says the Gemara. When do we say that even a lova is allowed to reject? That's when we're talking about our kosher b'surya. And in this context, our kosher b'surya means courts of amaratzim. We're talking about people who are just not holding cup. Take a look at Rashi, third of the way down. The lova can say, look, you pick the bezdin of Amaratzim. These guys are regulars. They're not experts. I have every right to turn that down. So it's a right of refusal, basically. Aval, however, mumchen lo. But if, in fact, the bezdin was a bezdin of mumchen, which is actually the case of our batei din are considered mumchen, so in such a case, if it's bezdin shel mumchen lo, they are not allowed to be rejected. There, a lova has to go to that bezdin. He cannot say, "I don't want to go to the CRC." The CRC is a bunch of experts, so then the lova is not allowed. So that's where we see in our Mishnah, where our Mishnah is very broad and allows for the swapping out. I don't like your bezdin, you don't like my bezdin, malva and lova, even though the lova has the lower hand in the situation. We still say it's allowed, but only barkos shel surya, only if it's talking about a bezdin that is not a high level bezdin. Rav Papa argues, Amar afilu tema mumchen. We could even say that it's talking about a case of mumchen. Kigon beidina de Rav Huna de Rav Chiza de Amar le mikam etrach nalach. So if you take a look at Rashi, what is it? Rashi, what does this mean? Rashi says we're talking about the tarbau b'chad makom, and this is a very good example in Chicago. You pick the agura, and I'm the lova. You're the malva, and we picked it. No, I want to go to the CRC, so I'm allowed to do that because they're both equivalent. I'm assuming they're both equivalent in regards to their mumcha status. But even then, a lova is allowed to say, I don't want to go to that mumcha bezdin. It's too far. I live in West Rogers Park. I want to go to the CRC, and that is considered acceptable. The Gemara says, wait 1 second. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Our Mishnah that the Dayanim were the ones who were picking the next bezdin. If you want to say that our Mishnah, like Rashi told us, was talking about bezdin, like it says Zeh Borer Lo Echad, that Karesh picks the CRC and Merzel rejects it. Merzel says, let's do the Aguda, and Karesh rejects it. Bezdin Basar de Pasei Luhu Azu Varu Lahu Beidin Achrini. The language of the Mishnah is very odd. Look at this. The language says that after the Mishnah told us that Karesh rejects Merzel and Merzel rejects Karesh, then those Batei didn't pick the other bezdin. You just were Mavato, those Batei did. So if you're saying that the phrase, the Maimer of our Mishnah, was talking about picking a bezdin, it's super weird. But Odin, furthermore, it seems almost like it's a mandate. Oh, I'm going to reject you, and you're not if, not im. It doesn't say if we reject. It seems like it's a fact on the ground. Elachi Kamar says the Gemara, when I pick one dayan, the two of us pick the next dayan. That's the right way to understand the first phrase of our Mishnah. First, in the middle with lines, why do we have a setup like this? Because that's fair. Like it says the Gemara, Amri b'ma'arava, they say in Eretz Yisrael, Mishmei Reb Zera, mitoch shezeh bor lo dayan echad, I pick number one. V'zeh bor lo dayan echad, you pick number two. V'shnein bor lo od echad, and together we pick the third. Everybody has a voice. We each have two people that we like. Yetze hadin la'amito. That is how we will get the din to be emes.
That's not the same thing as saying we'll both be comfortable. Yetze hadin la'amito. You're right, we'll both be comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what the Gemara says. Why is it?
Yetze din la'amito. There's no more emes in this setup. There's no more emes. Why? The dayanim aren't more or less qualified just because I pick them.
Soon they don't all qualify.
Yeah,
so we'll be satisfied, but I don't
correct.
know if that makes it.
You don't like the language of Yetze din la'amito. That is that what you're saying? I agree with you.
I can translate it, and that's what it means. But it would seem like you said that it's more a function of everybody goes to the.
That's what the Balei Tosfos say. Take a look over here. Even the guy who's chayv is going to pay. V'yomer kushta daini.
Very good. Okay.
I picked him, so I know he's telling the truth. But it's not what the words mean.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, correct.
But it's clearly the style, like you're saying.
That the language is the wrong language.
Everybody goes home happy.
Yeah, it's just I just don't know what that has to do with emes. I can think of a lot of things that make people happy that aren't emes. It's most of what we pursue that is enjoyable is lav dafka emes. It's just that okay, so it is what it is. But this language is a little bit maraf sinigram. It is difficult. Next two dots, 2/3 of the way down, maybe a little bit more, 3 lines into the middle with lines. Nema, perhaps we should say, and now we're going to have like 4 or 5 different shitas in this machlokes Reb Meir and the Chachamim. Perhaps we should say, but Reb Yehuda Amar Rav Kamiflagi. Perhaps Reb Meir and the Chachamim argue about Reb Yehuda Amar Rav. The Amar Reb Yehuda Amar Rav, Ein ha'edim chosmen al ashtar, ken yoden mi chosei mi mohen. I'm not allowed to sign on a document unless I know who you are. And sometimes this happens. I've been called to sign on a tnaim, and I don't know the other person. What are you supposed to do? Grill them? How from are you? How do you do that? That's what the din is according to Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. And what's the machlokes? That perhaps this idea of ein chosman al ashtar elim ken yodin michosem imohen, maybe that's a machlokes or mayor less like the Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav, because he held that I picked one, you picked the other, you don't know mine, and I don't know yours. So how is it? We don't know that that's the case. Maybe Rameir doesn't hold a Rabbi Yehuda Marav. Rabbanon Esahu the Rabbi Yehuda Marav, who says that Shnei Dayanim Boran Lehen Orecha, that all the Dayanim have to know each other. And so that's a beautiful deal. Perhaps that's our machlokas. Says the Gemara, lo, that's not correct. Everyone agrees with Rabbi Yehuda Marav that you have to know who you're signing with. And everyone agrees that when it comes to Dayanim, they have to know each other. Do the Baalei Dinin have to know everybody? Meir Savar Das Baalei Dinin Nami Ba'inan, Rabbanan Savar Das Hadayanim Ba'inan, Das Baalei Dinin Lo Ba'inan. So we don't exactly know what the machlokas is, but it seems to not be about the case of Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Gufa, the Gemara asks, or the Gemara quotes something that we've learned already, this din right now. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Ein ha'edim chosman al ashtar, Tanya Am Helcha, we have a brisa like this. Kach hayu nekiyeh hadas sheb Yerushalayim osin. This is how the holy Jews in Yerushalayim would behave. Chosman al ashtar, lim ken yodim michosim iman. They would never sign without knowing what other people were doing. If they were dayanim, they wouldn't sit to adjudicate without knowing who everybody was. I wouldn't even sit down at a meal with you unless I knew you. No random meals. I'm going to Shalit. You brought me out. Your colleague is there. Don't know who they are. Sorry, not coming. It's an unbelievable hakpada. Says Rashi, it's not stam. It's when you're a Talmud Chacham Pasnash, you're going to sit down with someone you don't know. No, you should hang out with the elite. You shouldn't be elite Chachamim. It's saying you should know who you're sitting with, because lav dafka that you're going to want to hear everything that comes out of their mouth. At the 2 dots, 10 lines from the bottom, Zeb Posel Dayana. We had said in our Mishnah this was the second machlokas between Rabbi and the Chachamim, that I can passel your dayan and you can passel mine. It says the Gemara, Kol Kamini to passel dayan. You're allowed to passel someone else's dayan. Like we saw before, that we're talking about a bezdin of people whose dayanim were like C plus dayanim. They were not exactly the highest caliber. Aval mumchen lo. But if you're talking about the greats, Rabbi Reese, Rabbi First, you're talking about people who are dayanim mumchen. These are people who, when you ask them shilas, it's mechudadim befihem. They don't kimat velo. They almost never. I think I shared this with you. I was standing in Rabbi First's office about a month ago. Oh my gosh, I got there 15 minutes early. Didn't realize I misread my clock. Couldn't have been happier. I sat there listening to him answer phone call after phone call. 1 minute other line, 1,000 times. The phone does not stop ringing. He was quoting beherchev from all of Shas and Poskim. So you're going to tell me that a mumche, I'm sorry, you can't use Rabbi First. A chutzpah, that's usher. You're not allowed to do that. So even now, if that's the case, let's say somebody says, we're going to use Rabbi First to it. No, I don't want to use him. Too bad. He's a mumche. You're not allowed to do that. Says the Gemara, but that's a problem. Maybe the Ketani Seifa, it's hard to say that that's what's going on over here, because what does it say in the Seifa? They said Masai. When is it that you're allowed to not accept someone else's dayan? That's bismash maybe Rashi and Krovan Psul. That's when there's a psul in the dayan. The Chachamim hold that by mumche you're not allowed. What does that imply about Rameir? The Rameir, he must hold mumchen nami kamar, that he would even passel a mumche. That's what it seems to be. So it says the Gemara, what did the Chachamim mean with their line? They didn't mean to leave that implication that Rav Meir would hold that you can be passel mumche. Of course, Rav Meir would hold you can't passel mumche. What did the Chachamim mean? Says the Gemara, aval im hayu ksherim. If in fact they were kasher, then naasu kemumche mipi bezin ben yochel poslan. If they were regular, then we treat them like they are mumchen, and then no other choice. You cannot cancel. Everyone agrees basically that if the person's a full mumchen, that you are not allowed to cancel them. So Tashma, let's see if we can understand this machlokes in another way. Amar lo Rav Meir, kol heimenu sheposel dayan shemumche lerabim. Says the Gemara, it's very difficult to posel someone who's a mumche lerabim. Says the Gemara, ema lo kol heimenu sheposel dayan shemchu rabim alehem. It's not that he's a mumche lerabim, it's that the rabbim have said about him that he's a mumche. What does that mean? Let's see the raya, because that will help explain everything. I'm allowed to posel your dayan. Achi kabel olah bezdin Shemumche lerabim divrei Reb Meir. When the whole world says, yes, he's the best dayan in town, that's when we accept it fully. But Edim should be in the same category as Mumche. They're a baki in their information, just like the dayan is a baki in their information. So it seems like a stira that a regular Mumche is allowed to be pasaled. The only type of mumche that's not allowed to be pasaled is one that's mumche l'rabim. So says the Gemara, Itmar Allah, Amar Ishlakish, Pek Kodesh, Yomar Davar Zeh. How could it be the Rav Meir would ever say something like that? That doesn't make any sense at all. We have to figure out what his shita is. How could he say that you can cancel another person's edim? It's just so out of line. So says the Gemara, Tani, therefore in our Mishnah, it doesn't say Edav, Tani Edo in the singular. And therefore, Edo Lamai, what was this person a single aid for? If you want to say it's for Mamonis, one person's not enough. Look at the top line of the page. One person's not enough. Either Shavua, if you want a person to, an individual person to bring about a scenario where you have to make a Shavua, Hemuni Mehamen Kibet, that's normal, that we do trust. So what's the scenario? We already know all of this. What's Eidos? It says really it is about money. And you're right, we normally need more than one, but Lotzricha, the Kiblei Alei Kibetre, that we need to that the Baalei Din accepted that the Dayan would function as two people. Says the Gemara, "My Kamash Malon, Dematzi Hadarbe." What are you trying to say, that we're allowed to go back on that psak if we have this guy who's one person by Mamonis and we were Kabbalah like Betre, that you're allowed to not agree with his psak? That can't be. Tanina, we already learned that. So we have two Mari Makomos. We have our Mishnah and we have this Brisa. Let's see what this Brisa says. Amar lo ne'eman alai Abba, I'm willing to have my father be the judge. Ne'eman alai Avicha, or I'm allowing your father to be the judge. Ne'eman alai Gimel Roi Bakar, these three guys, Afal Pi, that they may not be the biggest Talmidei Chachamim, let's all agree to use them. After they give their psak, you're allowed to go back. You don't have to rely on them. And so what's our Mishnah teaching? That's the same thing as the Brisa. Turning to the top of Daf Chaf Gimel Lamed Aleph, our shortest Amud we've had in a long time, and double the size of most of the dapim. Means you can't go back on the psak. The psak is final. You and I accepted upon ourselves that my father is going to be the dayan. So it says the Gemara, you're not allowed to go back on that according to the Chacham. Amar Rav Dimi Breder Rav Nachman Breder Rav Yosef Kigon de Kiblei Bechad. That was the case where we said about that Brisa that there was only one person who we had agreed to use as our dayan. That was the same exact ukimta that Rav Ashi said in our Mishnah. So what's the difference between the Mishnah and the Brisa? Says the Gemara Tzricha, we actually need both our Mishnah and the Brisa at the bottom of Chav Gimel Lamed Aleph. The Itana of Abba ve'Avich, if we only had the Brisa at the bottom of the page where I said, well, let's use my father, and you said, that's fine, or let's use your father, and you said, that's fine. There we say that's perfectly fine to use them, and lo hadarbe, even according to Reb Meir. Why? Mishum de'aba ve'avich chazul alma, because in general they're very good edim. There's an inherent psul because you're related to them, but that's what the Gemara says. Aval chad kibei trei, but in our Mishnah where one person is being treated like two people, tele alma lo chazi, that in general one person is insufficient. Maybe the Chachamim would agree that you can be choser in such a case. Therefore, we need the case of our Mishnah. But if we only had our Mishnah, but the cases are not similar enough where they're mamish hands and gloves. The cases are therefore both repeated. Our Mishnah was talking about one aid that was used by the Baalei Din to be like two. They agreed to use him. And the second case was where you and I agreed to use our fathers to be the Dayan. So that's what the Gemara says. We need all of them. Tzricha. What else can we do? We don't have a choice. Says the Gemara, Chav Gimel Amud Beis, 8 lines down. Midiktani Reisha. The problem is that in the Reisha, Dayano, Besefa Edav, Alma Dafka Ktani. The Gemara here is raising a very sharp point. You want to say that the word Edim or Edav is really Edo, but there are other words that are plural in our Mishnah. So you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're going to make an ukimta, it has to fit the entire Mishnah. So that's where this really comes in, because 8 lines down in the Mishnah on Chav Gimel Amud Aleph, it says Edav. But in the beginning of our Mishnah, it says Daino. his dayan. So we see the language was quite specific, and therefore none of this is really a good argument. This whole argument of Rav Ashi that is talking about Edo really does fall apart. Then the Gemara provides another possibility about the machlokes in our Mishnah on Chav Kem Lamed Aleph at the top, at the open of the parak between Rav Meir and the Chachamim. Amar Rabbi Lazar, the machlokes between them is bebahu ve'acher leposlan. One of the guys, me and David Merzel are the Baalei Din, and I show up with Gerald to passel David's guy. Says the Gemara, Kol Kamina, does that really work? After all, Nogea be'edusahu. We know about this principle that if I'm Nogea b'davar, then I'm not allowed to have an opinion, right? So it would be ki'ilu like me saying that Mo didn't do a good job. No, I'm Nogea b'davar, so you can't really listen to me. So therefore, over here, why would it work if I was one of the Baalei Din to invalidate a dayan that David chose? A chutzpah, I'm no b'davar. So Amar Ravacha Berei de Ravika Kagon Shekara Alav Ir. No, there was a real scenario that came up. It wasn't his own feelings. There was a real circumstance that came up that allowed for me to have a real voice, and I wasn't being no b'davar. Says the Gemara Ir Damai. What was the claim against this guy? So even if I say that the guy stole, but who knows if it's actually true? It's my word against his. So maybe I'm just a liar. Perhaps what we're talking about is a case where I say, guys, he's a brother to David. It's Yoni Merzel. He can't be a dayan. So here is the machlokas between Rav Meir and the Chachamim. Halfway down, Meir Sabar Hani Amishpacha Kamisadeh Ve'ihu Memela Kapasil. So this is fascinating. I'm not paskening on the guy that he's a Gazlan. They're related. I didn't create the psul. They're brothers. So Rav Meir has no problem with that. Rabbanan Sabri, yes, but sof no ge'beidu so givaldik. If you try to invalidate an aid by saying if I try to invalidate your aid by saying your aid is your brother, so Rav Meir says that's a good argument. That's not no ge'ed be'edu, son. That's me highlighting the family tree that you're related to each other. A beautiful argument. The Chachamim still say no ge'ed b'davar, which is amazing. If I raise that issue in Bezdin, let's say Yoni Merzel signs up to be the dayan, I'm like, yeah, this is not happening. You know what the Chachamim say? You're no ge'ed b'davar. That's incredible. That's incredible. So the Gemara is really struggling to figure out the scope of what does it mean to be nogea b'davar. There are some scenarios where, according to Rav Meir, nogea b'davar doesn't apply, and there are some scenarios where nogea b'davar applies. His distinction is that if it's just a matter of my opinion, then that's nogea b'davar. But if there is a fact on the ground that's researchable, so then Rav Meir says it works. The Chachamim say it doesn't work. Says the Gemara, Yosef Abdimi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Machlokes P'shtei Kita Edom. Really, the Machlokes of Meir and the Chachamim is when there were two sets of Edom. The Meir Savar Tzarech Levarer. If I bring Kas number one group, then I need to bring the second one. Rabbanan Sabri, I only need the first one in Tzarech Levarer. All good. That's what their Machlokes is about. Aval, says the Gemara, Bekas Achas, if there only ever was one group of Edom, then Divrei HaKol, everyone would agree that you don't have to bring anybody else. Ain't Yachol Poslan, then you can't passel them. The only time Reb Meir would say that you can passel is if there's two sets of Edom and the second one doesn't show up. And if the second one doesn't show up, you can passel the first. Amr Lefan of Reb Ami v'Reb Asi. What's the correction here? Rebbe Ami v'Rebbe Asi. Says the Gemara, these early Amoraim, they said in front of them, Ein Sham Elakas Achas Mahu. What if there's only one group? The Gemara says, we just talked about that. Ein Sham Elakas Achas V'Amris Aval Bekas Achas Divrei HaKol Ein Yachol Posam. We just spoke about that. Why are you asking? So says the Gemara, Ela Nimseis Kashnia Krovin Opsulin Mao. Really what our question is Kas number one is great. It's Ruvain and Shimon. They're not related to us. They're not related to each other. They're perfect Edom. But Kas number two is Yoni and David Merzel. So under those circumstances, that's a problem. Amar Lehen, Kvar Ha'idu Edom Harishonim. Don't worry. We believe the first set of Edom. First set of Edom are the Machriya. Ika Amr, there are those who say first at the long lines on Chav Gimel Amar Aleph, 7 lines from the bottom. Amr Rashi Kvar Ha'idu Edom Harishonim. And the Gemara says, that's the same exact thing. Kvar he'idu edim harishonim. Yeah, he says that they seem to agree. Why is this an Ikad Amri? Why didn't I notice this before? Kvar Heidu Edim Harishonim Ikad Amri. Oh, just the name. Amar Ravashi, just the person's name. That was the addition as to who said it. But same idea is that if we have two sets of Edim, the first set of Edim is a real set of Edim. The second one are brothers, cousins, well, maybe not cousins, they're brothers, they're husband, wife, whatever the case may be. So then that doesn't work. Says the Gemara, perhaps Nema, that maybe the machlokas between Reb Meir and the Chachamim is beplukta the Rebbe. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel kamiflage. Tanya, what do they talk about? Abali don b'shtar uve chazaka. I have a star and a chazaka, and don b'shtar. The halacha is that a star is more powerful than a chazaka, divrei Rebbe. Rashba gomer nidon b'chazaka. He says something very strange that the marimakum that we use is the chazaka b'havinan. But when we analyze the sheet of the Rashbag, who says we use the chazaka b'chazaka v'lo b'shtar, why would you say that? Ela ima af b'chazaka. Really, we need both. V'kaimalon b'tzarich levarer pligi. We're talking about where we have to be mevarer. You have both, bring both. Let's be mevarer. So says the Gemara, maybe that's what the Machloket says about that. According to Rav Meir, you have to be mevarer, and according to the Rashbag, and according to the Chachamim, you don't. Says Gemara, no, that's not true. Ali, but the Rashbag, according to Shem Ben Gamliel, who says Chazaka Kule Amalo Pligi. Ki Pligi Ali, but the Rebbe. There's only a Machlokas within Rebbe. The Rav Meir ke Rebbe within Rebbe. Meir would be like Rebbe here, where he would agree to the star. The Rabbanon, what would the rabbis say? The rabbis in our Mishnah, Amri lachad kan lo ka'amar Rebbe, that you have to be mevarer ahasam ele b'chazaka. V'mikoach shtar kasi, because both of them are there. You have shtar and chazaka. Aval hacha dahani edim lav mikoach edim achrinika. So afilu Rebbe moda dein tzarich levarer. But in our case over here of Rashbag, that's not a case where Rebbe would argue, and therefore this is not a good argument to explain the machlokas between Rebbe and the Chacham, Reb Meir and the Chachamim. Last line of Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Says the Gemara, Yasa Ravin Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Reisha be'edim psulim v'dayonim ksherim. The Reisha, when we talk about our Gemara, the Reisha is talking about a case where the edim are pasal and the dayanim are kasher. And migu de pasle edim, because the edim were pasal, pasle namidaini. We were able to passel the others as well. There was a whole concern of psulim over here. And Seifa, the end of our Mishnah, b'dayanim psulim be'edim ksher, demigu de pasle dayanim pasle nami edim. So asks the Gemara, maskif la rava, bishlama, I understand part of this. Bishlama migu de pasle edim pasle nami dayanim. I could understand that if the edim are pasel, we should also be concerned about the dayanim ika b'din achron. I can take them somewhere else. Migu de pasle dayanim pasle nami edim v'edim suleka. Edim, we have a limited scope. There's more than one bezdin, but these might be the only witnesses. How could you just throw away the Edim? They're the only people who can share what's going on over here. So says the Gemara, Lo tzricha de'ika kas acheres. You're right. Under normal circumstances, I would agree. Here we have extra edim. I haleka kas acheres mai. What would be the din if there were no other sets of edim? Says the Gemara, Hachanami, you're correct. Lo matzi pasle. So says the Gemara, if that's true, if this is the shita of Ravin, that when we talk about only one kas being available, that we believe them, says the Gemara, Hainu de Ravdimi. That's mamish what we saw on the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis. In which case, Ravin and Ravdimi are exactly the same. It says the Gemara, Ika beinayu migu. The difference between them is migu. The Mar Savar Amrina and migu. That according to Ravin, he does hold of the principle of migu, as we saw on the top of this page. Umar Savar, that according to Ravdimi, he doesn't hold of migu at all. And that's why the cases are different, but they do agree fundamentally what the case is about, which is one kas of Edim. Gufa. Let's analyze the question of that we saw on the bottom of, where was it? On the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis about this rhetorical comment. Amar Rish Lakish, Peh Kadosh Yomar Davash. How could a mayor ever say such a thing? So he said Tani Edo. That was the way that he tried to wriggle out of it. That our Mishnah wasn't talking about Edov in the plural, but Edo in the singular. Any, how can you say that? Amar Ula, you're telling me Rish Lakish was saying this line of Peh Kadosh Yomar Darazeh? Rish Lakish was brass knuckles. Says the Gemara of Amar Ula, Haroas Rish Lakish Bebeis HaMedrash Kilu Oker Harim V'Tochnon Zebazeh. He wasn't talking nice. He would call things like they were. And if he didn't agree with something, he wouldn't say Peh Kadosh Yomar Davar Zeh. He would give a scathing rebuke. Amar Ravina Ba'alo Kol Haro Reb Meir Bebeis HaMedrash Kilu Oker Hare Harim V'Tochnan Zebazeh. He was even a higher level of rhetoric and a higher level of just calling it again, just saying what you're seeing. Unbelievable. So how then do we understand this din of Reish Lakish? Says the Gemara, a beautiful idea. Hachi Kamar Bo Re'ei Kama Mechabevin Zeh. How much did these people love each other? Ki hade Yasiv Rebbe v'Ka'amar Aser lahatmina satzone. You're not allowed to do hatmana by cold items. Amar lafana Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi Abba hiter lahatmina satzone. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi said, my father allowed it. Amar le, what did Rabbi say? I'm done talking. Kfar hora zakin. No problem. I back down. So that's a beautiful idea. Amar Papa Bo Rei Kama Mechaven says that the Ilu Rabbi Yossi Kayam Hayakaf Yoshev Livnei Rebbe. If Rabbi Yossi was alive, he would have bowed over in contrition and right in front of Rebbe. To Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi Memale Makom Avosav Haba Hayakaf Yoshev Livnei Rabba. But still, the Ka'amar Kfar Horazakin. Rebbe was showing deference to someone who would have kissed his feet. So that's how Talmidei Chachamim should behave. The only part that's difficult about this is that in halacha he didn't agree with it, but he allowed the psak to stand. Difficult. Amar Reb Oshaya, Mai dechsiv v'akach li shnei makalos le'echad karasi nolam echad karasi chovlem. So says the Gemara, what's this pasuk talking about? We'll see right now that one is talking about the way Talmidei Chachamim interacted with each other in Bavel and one in Eretz Yisrael. Noam, Eil Talmidei Chacham shaber tishol, sheman imen zeh lezeh b'halacha. They were nice to each other in halacha. Chovlen Eilu Talmidei Chacham shabavel shemechavlen zeh lezeh b'halacha. They were horrible to each other. There's politics now in Eretz Yisrael going on that are horrible, internal in a yeshiva, terrible mess. So that's not right. It's equivalent to Bavel. Vayomer eile shnei bnei hayitzar ha'omdin v'shnayim zeisim aleha. What does this mean? Yitzar, says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak eilu tamid chacham sheberetz Yisrael shenochen zel zebalacha kashem and zayis. It's talking about oil. Oil flows smoothly. People treat each other nice. They're bitter like an olive. An unripe olive is very, very tart, very sour, and that's how they treated each other. The pasuk says a little bit more to go. Base Eretz Shinar. What's going on in this pasuk? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shmuel Ben Yochai Ze Zu Chanifa V'Gasus Haruach Sheyardu LeBavel. This is talking about Chanufa. Chanufa is false flattery, and Gasus Haruach is talking about Gaiva. That's what's going on in this pasuk of Shtayim Noshim Yotos. And in fact, halacha l'maisa, we have a din that we're supposed to make a bracha of Mechayei HaMesim if you don't see someone in 10 years. L'maisa, we don't make this bracha according to most poskim. The Piskei Teshuvos quotes the concern of some of the poskim that we live in a dor chanufa. All of our flattery is like a joke. Oh, it's so good to see. No, it's not. It's not. And because it's not so good to see you, then the bracha Mechayei HaMesim has to come from a geshmak, a place. But if you don't really feel the geshmak, you can't make the bracha of Mechayei HaMesim. That's why we made the minhag. Baruch Mechayei HaMesim. I haven't seen you in so long. Because you can't say Baruch Atah Hashem Mechayei HaMesim because we're not nice people. We don't really feel the level of simcha. So some of the poskim say, what if I do? What if it's a child? What if a long lost relative, a long lost friend? I think there are a handful of people in our lives that if we saw them after a decade, we would really feel simcha. Maybe not most people, but definitely a lot of people. That's what the Gemara says. The Gasus Haruach leBavel Nachis. How can you say Gasus Haruach went down to Bavel? Amar Mar Asara Kaben Gasus Yardu LaOlam Tisha not LaElam Ve'achas Kol LaOlam Kula. Most of it went to Elam, another location, and only one went to the rest. Says Gemara in really LaBavel Nachis. It really the Gasus Haruach went down to Bavel. Ve'ishtarbu ve'hu de'ishtarbev LaElam, and it got mixed up and passed on to Elam. But really, most of the Gasus Haruach went there. And I think we absorbed it here in America. The Gasus Haruach, I think it crossed over the Atlantic. The Kanami, this makes a lot of sense. Dechsiv livnos la beis eretz shinar shmamina. That it seems that it did transfer. Amar mar siman Gasus Haruach anius. One of the signs of haughtiness is anius. The anius lebavel nachis, and destitution showed up in Bavel. My anius Torah. When a person doesn't have Torah, It's an inverse relationship. The more gasus ruach you have, by definition, the less Torah you have. The more Torah you have, by definition, the less gaiva you're going to have. Tichsiv, achos lanu ktana v'shadayim ein la. Obviously, a homily of homilies. A pasuk in Shir Hashem that it says achos lanu ktana, the sister is small and she has no breasts. What is this talking about? So it says the Gemara, Amar of Yochanan zo elam shezachsa lilmod v'lo zachsa lilame. They learned, but they couldn't teach. Similar to a woman without the capacity to nurse, who has no breast. That's what the Gemara is referring to. My Bavel, what is the whole story about the word Bavel? Rav Yochanan, Belula b'mikra, Belula b'mishnah, Belula b'talmud. They knew everything. But b'machshakim hoshivani kimesei olam. Rav Yirmiyah zeh talmud shel Bavel. That things were not. Things were very dark. There were a lot of gasus ruach. There was a lot of negativity. That's what the last Rashi says on the Mishnah, on the Gemara over here. She'ein nochin ze im ze b'talmudam safek biyadam. Who knew? I don't know if this is metaphysical or otherwise, but when a person is not nice, so then you don't get to hold on to your Torah as much. We'll stop right here. Mir Hashem on Shabbos, we'll pick up at the Mishnah from on the bottom of Chav Daled. Should be able to finish everything up on Shabbos. Wishing you all a beautiful night.